Now we gotta talk about a tweet that I sent yesterday that actually did quite well. And the reason I'm talking about it is because I think it's a conversation that really as a society we gotta start having. And guess what? I'm gonna take the reins along with other people who are also taking the reins, not saying it's just me, and make an opinion on this. Now, as you know, opinions can be wrong, but at least it's good to have an opinion. And this is my take, okay? Look at my take. So I tweeted this yesterday. If, quote, biological men keep playing in women's sports, then soon there will not be any biological women left in competitive sports. Instead, we'll be left with biological men playing men's sports, biological men playing women's sports. And then I wrote, so much for gender equality. Now, unfortunately, this was spawned by a few different things, some studies on what's going on, but also some of the recent, dare I say, controversies that are happening. Here, for example, is a piece where we saw that a girls basketball team withdrew from the state tournament they were involved in to protest against a transgender player who dominates games. And basically, they say here that a women's basketball team withdrew from the Vermont Division 4 state tournament in protest to the fact that a transgender individual was playing, a biological male was playing against women. And biological women, I suppose I should say. And they write here, allowing biological males to participate in women's sports sets a bad precedent for the future of women's sports in general. And they write down here that in one game, the individual blocked 7 shots. That means 7 shots, typically closer to the basket, so much more likely to go in, were blocked by the guy who was taller than every girl on the floor and can jump higher and is likely significantly stronger. In what world is this remotely fair? They write here. And there are some comments here about how this is why men's competition records, sprinting, jumping, weightlifting, dwarf women's. There's talk about safety concerns and studies related to this. And I thought it was really interesting because when I talked about it, I tweeted about it, and somebody replied and said, "Oh well, transgender individuals have been allowed in the Olympics, for since 2004." Somebody replied, a tweet replied me with that, and I'm like, I don't know about that. So what I did is I did a little bit of digging to see what we've got, and first of all, it's worth noting that. The percentage of individuals that are identifying as LGBT in this statistic here, which would include, sort of potentially a boost in the trans population, has been going up substantially over the past few years. In fact, if you go back to 2014, you had closer to, on average, about maybe 2 or 3% of Americans identifying as LGBT. And in 2022, we're up to about 7.2%. So you've had this large increase in identification. And possibly that's because it's become more acceptable, right? But I thought this was very interesting. This history here. In 2003, the International Olympic Committee convened an ad hoc committee to discuss the issue of transgender athletes. And what they actually required that to be eligible for participation in female or male competitions, you would actually have to complete the surgery to reassign your gender. So, in other words, not only do you have to go through hormone therapy for 2 years after your, basically sexual reassignment, but you have to do something really irreversible here, right? This is you are full committed. And as a result, you actually didn't have a transgender person until 2008 in the Olympics, in the hammer throw. 2012, you had the same person, a biological male who competed in a women's hammer throw, ended up placing 5th. 2015, transgender male qualified for a world championship here, and essentially, they also, what did they say here? They removed. Oh yeah, here the Olympic Committee specifically asked for the removal of the requirement of the surgeries, right? Because the surgery is sort of gender reassignment surgery is again, pretty irreversible and pretty big deal here. And it was very interesting that you really only had that discussion start, an agreement being made starting in about 2015. And so those who transition from female to male are eligible now to compete in the male category without the reassignment. That's essentially what they've now allowed at the Olympics. So in other words, since 2003, yeah, they've allowed trans individuals in the Olympics, but only if you went through the whole surgery to reassign your gender. And it was only in 2015, at the end of 2015, that they allowed females to compete in male sports without the reassignment, like the actual surgery, right? But so far, you still need to have the surgery to actually compete in the Olympics as a trans individual. And so this is where a lot of folks are suggesting, hey, like, it's not fair that trans individuals are able to play in women's sports, because basically you're potentially going to just kill women's sports. And when you look at studies on this, which there are plenty, quick Googles of them will pull them up. But what you find is that people who go through sort of the hormone replacement still have statistically a 10 to 20% advantage over biological women as a biological male for up to 2 years of going through sort of the testosterone suppressant hormone applications. And so you really have a competitive advantage for males for certainly the first 2 years of essentially transitioning, becoming trans. And here it is. It's actually a Guardian piece. I believe I saved that right here. Let me just show you the stat so you could see it directly, because the Guardian did a whole piece on this. And then it gives us the exact sort of stats and numbers on it. Here it is. Okay, The Guardian. So on screen here, trans women retain a 12% edge in tests 2 years after transitioning. Groundbreaking new study on transgender athletes has found trans women retain a 12% advantage in running tests even after taking hormones for 2 years to suppress testosterone. And so this is why the International Olympic Committee suggests that trans individuals may have an unfair competitive advantage. The other thing that is deemed somewhat unfair by some folks here is this idea that right now, if somebody becomes trans, they have to prove that they have less than 10 nanomoles per liter of testosterone. However, that's still potentially as much as 10 times as high as a biological female's testosterone levels, which range between 0.12 and 1.79 nanomoles per liter. And so over here, you have some more information on the studies. One thing that was very interesting was that individuals who hadn't started their transition, trans women, so men, biological men who became women, performed 31% more push-ups and 15% more sit-ups in 1 minute on average than the biological women, and ran about 21% faster. And it took a full 2 years, really, for some of those advantages to go away. However, there were still some advantages that remained even after 2 years. Now, there are also some studies suggesting that after 2 years, you start getting more alignment. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I think society's really got to look at and say, is there potentially an argument to be made that maybe there should just be a different division entirely? Like maybe you have biological men's sports, biological women's sports, and then trans sports, right? Is that potentially where the future goes? Because I think we circle back over here, and when we look at the data, it's very difficult to argue, in my opinion, that people who are a biological man, certainly any time before 2 years, and even after that, you still have advantages, can fairly compete with biological women. So curious to see what everybody else thinks about that. But that's just sort of some of my thoughts and some more detail in terms of why I have those thoughts. And, I'm not here to always say, hey, my opinion's right or it's perfect. It's just to say, hey, look, I have an opinion. Here's why I have the opinion, and I'm open to talking about it. But yeah, this is one that's quite interesting to me.